There is a moment right before an Olympic archer releases an arrow where the entire world disappears. The crowd of thousands becomes silence, and the wind becomes irrelevant. The score, the pressure, the years of training, all of it collapses into a single point of absolute clarity. The arrow travels over 70 meters and lands within millimeters of where it was intended, not because the archer got lucky, not because they were gifted with supernatural calm, but because they trained something most people have never even considered training: the architecture of attention itself. You have been told your whole life that focus is a personality trait, that some people are simply wired to concentrate and others are not. That discipline is something you either have or you don't. And so when you sit down to study, to work, to think through a complex problem, and your mind begins to drift after 4 minutes, you blame yourself. You tell yourself you are weak, undisciplined, not built for deep work, and then you try harder the next time, white-knuckling your way through a session, burning cognitive energy just to stay in the chair, and still ending the day feeling like you accomplished nothing that truly mattered. The frustration compounds, the self-doubt accumulates, and eventually, without realizing it, you begin to accept a diminished version of what your mind is capable of. That narrative is not only wrong, it is the very thing keeping your attention fragmented. Olympic archers don't have a different brain than you. They have a different training protocol. And when you understand what that protocol actually targets, you will see that everything you've been doing to improve your focus has been missing the most critical variable entirely. The first thing to understand is that attention is not a single resource you either have or you don't. Neuroscience has established with clarity that attention operates through multiple distinct systems in the brain. There is the alerting network, which manages your state of readiness. There is the orienting network, which determines where your attention points. And there is the executive control network, which governs your ability to maintain focus and suppress distraction. Most people, when they try to improve concentration, are only engaging the surface level of one of these systems. They are trying to force alertness through caffeine or willpower without touching the deeper architecture that determines whether attention can hold its aim under pressure. Olympic archers, through the demands of their sport, have accidentally engineered a training system that targets all three networks simultaneously. And that is where the real lesson begins. Archery at the elite level is not primarily a physical sport. The draw weight, the form, the equipment, all of that is secondary to what happens between the ears. Coaches who work with national teams will tell you directly, two archers can have identical technique and one will collapse under pressure while the other performs better than in practice. The differentiating variable is always the internal environment. The quality of attention, the ability to enter a specific cognitive state on demand and hold it for precisely as long as required. The first method elite archers use is something called the process anchor protocol. Here is how it works. Before every single shot, the archer executes an identical sequence of mental steps, not a vague intention to focus, but a precise and memorized internal routine. They check their stance, they set their grip. They establish what is called a pre-shot routine that functions as a cognitive trigger. The brain learns through repetition that when this sequence begins, everything non-essential must be suppressed. Over thousands of repetitions, the routine becomes a doorway. The moment the sequence starts, the executive control network engages automatically. Attention narrows, distractions lose their grip. This is not meditation. This is conditioning. The archer is not trying to clear their mind. They are training the brain to shift states on command through a reliable, repeatable trigger. You can apply this directly. The reason you cannot focus when you sit down at your desk is that you have no trigger. You open your laptop, check 3 things out of habit, respond to a message, and by the time you intend to begin deep work, your brain is already fragmented across 5 different threads of attention. The session is compromised before it starts. What you need is a process anchor of your own, a sequence always the same that signals to your executive control network. This is the moment. Everything else closes. The sequence can be simple. 3 slow breaths, setting a physical boundary like putting your phone face down, writing one sentence defining exactly what the session is for. The content matters less than the consistency. Repetition is what builds the neurological doorway. Repetition is what transforms an intention into a state. If you have ever experienced this, where you sat down to work and 15 minutes in, you realized you were completely locked in, that you had forgotten time, that your thinking was sharper than usual, leave a comment below. Write the words, "I know that state," because that is exactly what we are talking about. That state is not random. It is not luck. It is a trainable door. And once you know how to open it deliberately, everything about your cognitive performance changes. The second method comes from what archery coaches call quiet eye training. This is one of the most well-researched phenomena in elite sports psychology. Quiet eye refers to the final fixation of the gaze on the target before a skilled performer executes a movement. In archery, top-level competitors show a measurably longer and more stable quiet eye period than intermediate or novice archers. The gaze is locked, the visual system is fully committed, and during that period, something remarkable happens inside the brain. Cognitive noise drops. Competing thoughts lose their signal strength. The mind is not empty, it is ordered. All available processing power is aligned toward a single point. What this tells us is that the visual system is a direct pathway into the attention network. Where your eyes go, your cognition follows. This is not metaphor. It is neurobiology. The reticular activating system in the brainstem uses visual input as one of its primary signals for determining what deserves cognitive resources. When your gaze is stable and intentional, you are sending a biological signal that this point in space matters. Your brain responds by suppressing irrelevant processing and amplifying focus on that target. The practical application for someone who does not shoot arrows is straightforward. Before beginning any high-stakes cognitive task, before you write, before you analyze, before you enter any session requiring real mental output, take 10 seconds to hold your gaze on a fixed point, not scanning, not drifting, fixed. Hold it long enough that you feel a subtle shift in your internal state. What you are doing is activating the quiet eye mechanism. You are using the visual system as a lever to engage the attention network before the work begins. This is not a ritual. This is a biological protocol, and it costs you nothing except the discipline to use it. Now, here is where most approaches to focus training stop. They give you a trigger system and a gaze technique and send you on your way. But there is a third layer that separates archers who perform at 80% consistency from those who perform at 95% under maximum pressure. And it has nothing to do with technique. It has to do with how they relate to distraction. The common assumption is that elite performers succeed because they eliminate distraction, that their focus is so powerful, nothing can penetrate it. This assumption is not only incorrect, it actively harms the people who believe it. Because when you adopt this model, every time a stray thought enters your mind during a deep work session, you interpret it as failure. You resist it. You fight it. And resistance, as any cognitive psychologist will tell you, is the fastest way to amplify the very thing you are resisting. Telling yourself not to think about something is the most reliable method of ensuring you think about it. The white bear problem, documented in research since the 1980s, demonstrates this with clinical precision. Thought suppression increases the frequency of the suppressed thought. Olympic archers have been taught a fundamentally different relationship with distraction. They do not fight it. They do not ignore it. They classify it and release it using a system that works with the brain's natural processing tendencies rather than against them. The method is this. When a distracting thought arises, the archer has been trained to mentally tag it with a single neutral label. Not good, not bad. Just a label. Then they return. The label is important because it engages the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible For executive function, just enough to acknowledge the thought without elaborating on it. The moment you elaborate, the thought gains energy. The moment you label and release, the thought loses its hold. The brain has been given acknowledgement. It no longer needs to escalate the signal. You can build this into your own practice with a simple tool. Keep a small notepad beside you when you work. The moment a thought arises that is not related to the task at hand, write it down in 3 words or fewer and return immediately to your work. You are not suppressing the thought. You are acknowledging it and scheduling it. The brain accepts this arrangement because the information has not been lost. It has been parked. And the executive control network can now reinvest its resources into the task at hand. These 3 systems working together, the process anchor, the quiet eye activation, and the label and release protocol, form a coherent architecture of attention, not a set of tips. A system, and when they are applied consistently over weeks, the neurological changes are measurable. The default mode network, which is responsible for mind wandering, becomes easier to disengage on command. The transition time between a distracted state and a focused state shortens dramatically, and the duration of genuine deep focus extends beyond what most people believe is biologically possible for them. But there is something that happens at this point in the training that almost everyone misses, and it is the hidden error that keeps high performers stuck at good when they are capable of exceptional. The mistake is treating attention as a performance and not as a state. When you see focus as something you perform, as something you demonstrate to yourself or to others, you introduce a layer of self-monitoring that corrupts the very thing you are trying to achieve. The archer who is thinking about whether they are focusing correctly is already out of focus. The moment you are watching yourself be focused, you have split attention. Part of you is on the task. Part of you is observing you on the task. And that split is enough to degrade the quality of your output in ways you can measure, but rarely trace back to their source. The final stage of what elite archers train is called absorbed attention. It is a state beyond concentration. It is the point where the self-monitoring loop goes quiet and the person becomes the process. Psychologists have studied this state extensively under different names. You may have encountered the concept of flow. But what archery training reveals is that flow is not something that happens to you when conditions are right. It is something you can architect through systematic reduction of self-interference. The process anchor removes the startup friction. The quiet eye protocol aligns the attentional systems. The label and release method clears the channel of cognitive noise. And when all 3 are working together, the self-monitoring loop no longer finds a foothold. Attention becomes absorbed. The work happens through you rather than being forced by you. This is not a mystical state. It is a trainable neurological condition. And the athletes who perform best under the most extreme pressure are not the ones with the most willpower. They are the ones who have removed the most interference. There is still one layer beneath this that very few people ever reach. It involves how you train attention between sessions, not during them. How you build the neurological substrate that makes all of this possible at the biological level. That is a system worth its own complete study, and it connects directly to how the brain consolidates attentional control during recovery, not during effort. Most people who want to improve their focus spend all their energy on the work itself and none on what the brain requires to rebuild its capacity. They are depleting an account they never replenish. And over time, the ceiling drops rather than rises. If that is something you recognize in yourself, the next video covers exactly that. How to rebuild attentional capacity at the level where it actually forms. Not discipline, not more effort. The biological substrate of elite focus and how to engineer it systematically. If what you heard today shifted something in how you see your own capacity to concentrate, subscribe. Not because you need more content, but because you are clearly someone who takes the performance of your mind seriously. That is precisely who this channel is for. The next video is ready, and what it reveals will change how you approach every session of deep work you do from this point forward.